information. Now viewers, the Nepal flood disaster is putting China's rapid infrastructure push across Tibet under renewed scrutiny. Now for decades, Beijing has built roads, railways, tunnels and hydropower projects across the Tibetan plateau, one of the world's most seismically fragile regions. Now experts are saying that this week's glacial collapse and flooding highlights just how difficult it is to separate natural hazards from large-scale human engineering projects in the Himalayas. And the disaster has once again revived the debate over China's massive hydropower project, which is Midog, on the Yarlung Sangpo area. Now, this also becomes the Brahmaputra as it flows into India, with strategic affairs expert Brahma Chilani calling it a quote-unquote water bomb in the making. A 2026 report by the Institute of Security and Development Policy has also flagged seismic risks tied to the project, warning it needs greater international scrutiny given the potential impact on downstream nations like India and Bangladesh. Let's also take a look at some of these projects that have been undertaken with China, and this is of course part of the rapid construction activity that is currently ongoing, of course, by China. I have in fact details of multiple projects that are being undertaken by China. So let's talk about the China's Himalayan build-up. Here we are talking about the Girong Nepal corridor. Remember, Girong area is located in Tibet. This is one of the areas where the flash flood in fact started. So this is a very seismically prone geology that we are talking about. So China has built up Geelong, or also known as Girong border port, on the Nepal frontier. This is the port that we are talking about. Also, let's also talk about the road corridor that has been built toward Nepal is being upgraded right now. So here we are talking about multiple sorts of projects been undertaken by China, that includes roads, bridges, hydropower projects. Here the Beijing and Kathmandu in collaboration are also pushing for a cross-border railway through the same Girong corridor. So here we are talking about this corridor. Remember, this is where the flooding started in Tibet. So both the countries, of course, pushing for a railway corridor as well in the same region. Now also move across to another slide in order to show you more details of the projects that are being undertaken by China. This railway's Himalayan section that you are seeing is called the hardest stretch of the entire project. So this is what we are looking at, a project that is built in collaboration both the countries. Another infrastructure that we are talking about is tunnels, highways, power lines, logistics hubs, all have been stacked into one fragile valley. So do remember that Himalayas are young mountains, and making this sort of a construction, heavy urbanization of this very fragile region now raises questions on China and also on Nepal, why it is collaborating in these heavy projects in these mountains which are ultimately impacting the country only. Let's also go across to another hydropower station project which is called as Zangmu. This is already running on the river. So this is the hydropower project that we are talking about, damming the river water. Another project is Ziacha project. This is the image that we are showing of that project. This is currently operational on this river too. Dagu and Zeksu are next in line on the same river. So we are not only talking about the construction that has already been completed, but further projects that have already been lined up by China in collaboration with Nepal. Construction has now begun, in fact, on what will be the world's largest hydropower project. This is the project that we are talking about, Yarlung Sangpo Cascade. It sits near the river's Great Bend at the base of the Himalayas. So you can very well understand if there is an upstream lake breach that happens, of course it's going to go downstream and affect all the northern districts which are located in Nepal, and further it will also affect countries like India and Bangladesh. Now, officials have already stated that it could dwarf the Three Gorges Dam in scale. So do remember that if these gorges are dwarfed, it will of course risen up the water levels in these areas, which will ultimately lead to more flooding in the downstream areas. We also have downstream Indian settlements sitting directly in the flow path. So do remember that there are a great many settlements in the downstream areas, these people will have to rescue themselves and evacuate from those areas because these currently pose great safety risk. We also have rail arteries which are running across the Himalayan region. This is one of the pictures that we are showing you of that rail artery, and in fact the railway corridor that has been built in these fragile mountains. This is called as Xinhua Tibet Railway. It is punching through the Hengduan mountains toward Ningxi. So again, another rail corridor project that has been built by the Chinese side. Let's also go across to more rail arteries that are in fact embedded in these mountains. We're talking about a parallel Xinjiang Tibet line which is planned to run nearly 5,400 meters altitude. So construction not only on the Nepalese side but also in the Tibet side where there is heavy construction that is taking place. More rail arteries, we're talking about the Yan Ningxi section, which needs 69 tunnels across 841 kilometers. So you can very well understand 69 tunnels are needed in order to have this project culminated. So you can understand 841 kilometer is far too long a stretch to be constructed on these fragile Himalayas. Let's also go across to more information now. As per some of the engineers, this terrain is some of the most seismically active on Earth. So if this is seismically active, you can understand that any time earthquakes can happen in these particular areas, and if earthquakes do happen, you can understand how it can lead to the collapse of the fragile infrastructure, which could further led to a particular kind of a lake that is formed because of the debris that is going to be accumulated. Let's also go across to tunnels now. The Mila tunnel sits above 4,750 meters, which is the world's highest highway tunnel. So this is the tunnel that we're talking about, which is again adds up to China's Himalayan buildup. Crews reportedly used artillery to blast through Asal Zari, a mountain sacred to local Tibetans. So you can understand this is the mountain which is also culturally significant for Tibetans. Now this particular mountain, which is of course, as you all know, that China has been clamping down on the culture, the language of Tibetan side and trying to have a greater crackdown on the infrastructure as well. So a mountain that is culturally significant to the Tibetan side is being blasted with the help of artilleries from the Chinese side as well. Also, let's look to the roads that have been built by China. Over 400 key roadway projects are currently underway across the Tibetan plateau. So very huge amount of infrastructure activity is currently underway from the Chinese side. Of course, this poses significant questions as to what the global community will now do, because if this construction is taking place, it is not only going to be impacting the Tibetans, the Chinese side, but it is also going to be impacting other countries such as India, Bangladesh and Nepal, which currently lie at the downstream of this particular geology that we're talking about. I would like to go across to my colleague, in fact, Brian Thomas, for more on this. Brian, we just showed the humongous nature of the infrastructure project that includes roads, tunnels, and in fact a huge amount of blasting also taking place in some of these mountains. It is going to pose a greater risk because this tragedy that has unfolded, it has already claimed hundreds of lives.
Definitely, we're talking about 469 lives, and this devastating floods in Nepal and Tibet has again put even China's rapid infrastructure expansion across the Tibetan plateau under the spotlight. For decades, we've been mentioning and we've been flashing that Beijing has been building an extensive network of road, railway, hydro power projects across even one of the most world's challenging seismic activity zones. This week's glacial collapse and flash flooding have renewed questions over how nature hazards are interacting with large-scale infrastructure development in the fragile Himalayan ecosystem. Even very importantly, this is very important to note that the disaster has brought fresh attention to China's massive Medog hydropower project on the Yalung Sangpo, which also enters India as the Brahmaputra. Strategic affairs experts being also stating the fact that it is a water bomb in the making. And even there was this 2026 report by the Institute of Security and Development Policy also highlighting seismic and geopolitical concern obviously surrounding the project and calling for a greater international scrutiny because of the potential indications of downstream nations such as India and Bangladesh. Even at the same time, experts are also cautioning that there is no established evidence linking to the current Nepal-Tibet disaster directly to Chinese infrastructure projects. But yes, clearly, it is the scale of the infrastructure development in this is extremely fragile mountain region, and it has definitely intensified the debate over environmental safeguards, disaster preparedness in areas exposed to earthquakes or landslides. China has already even transformed large part of the Tibetan plateau with some of the world's most ambitious infrastructure, from high altitude highways and railways
All
to
right,
mega.
Brian, thank you so much for all of these updates. Moving into a very short break.